welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to talk about a topic that's been really hard for me in the last 3 years of growing. So I've been growing vanda orchids for the past 3 years. I've noticed that growing vandas indoors in an environment where you have drier conditions and you have less humidity, especially in the winter, it can be pretty tough. So I've been figuring out how I can make my vandas thrive. I've noticed that the vandas that do the best in indoor conditions tend to be the miniature vandas. So I've been gravitating more towards those. But I killed a lot of vandas last year, mostly because I did a setup where I put a lot of my vanda orchids into coconut husk and clay pots. So a lot of times, like you'll see a lot of them, I have them like this. This one is the Ascocentrum miniatum crossed with the neofinetia falcata. So I just found that last year I didn't get to really water my collection much. I was going through a lot and I only had the chance to water once a week. So this wasn't enough for this kind of setup. Thankfully, this vanda is okay. But I've realized when you see people with success with vandas, a lot of them tend to be in very humid environments. They can grow outdoors. A lot of folks down in Florida grow beautiful, beautiful, beautiful vandas. They grow them bare root. So I've learned that vandas need a lot of air in their roots, but they also need a lot of moisture, more so than many other orchids. So you really need to pay attention. So my thinking last year when I put this into clay pots and coconut husk was, I was thinking that the coconut husk will maintain a lot of moisture because coconut husk has these pieces and they tend to generally hold moisture pretty well. But I was watering just once a week, so it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. So the problem is me. The problem is not the setup. I think this setup could have been good if I was able to water more often, but I didn't. So I need to upgrade for my environment and my ability to water. Now with that said, I'm much better with watering, but I can't water more than 3 times a week. I'm just very busy. My collection is huge, so I don't have time to water constantly. If you have less vandas, or rather less orchids in general in your collection, you're able to get through. I think you're able to handle watering a bit more and you can bare root your vandas. Put them in water daily or hose them down, especially if you have them outdoors. It's a lot easier to deal with them. But if you're indoors, you can't just spray your collection down. It's a lot more effort. You can't get water on the floors, for example. So that's a disadvantage that we have as growers. So I've just been thinking about trial and error. I have this Vanda vietnamica, which is kind of struggling in here. It's been in semi-hydro for almost 3 years. It's surviving. It's bloomed several times. It keeps growing. I've lost a couple of leaves here. So I want to move my vandas into a setup that makes more sense for me. And as I was moving things around, I noticed that sphagnum moss really makes a difference. So I have a few of my vandas here. I want to show them all to you so you could pick something up from the ones that I have. But I just find that the neofinetia falcata types are super easy. They do very well in moss for me. Sometimes you could put them in a bark or moss mixture, but they tend to bloom pretty often. I used to have a neofinetia in semi-hydro for years and it declined after a period of time. So I'm finding that moss or bark, it tends to be more reliable for me. But when we think about growing vandas indoors, the challenge is, as I mentioned, the roots need a lot of air, but they also need a lot of constant moisture. So the coconut husk with the clay pot, it was an idea that I thought would help, but what really I find does well for me is if I put them in pure sphagnum moss. So I repotted this one with you guys. I'll link it right here. It's losing some of its bottom leaves, which is completely normal. Usually it grows up on top, new fans push through from the bottom, and you lose the old leaves down here. But this is putting out good roots. And I put it in this airy pot here. This is an orchid pot where it's extremely, extremely airy. So this gives me an opportunity to get the roots nice and moist, but it provides the airiness that this orchid requires. So this is the kind of setup that I'm going to be moving forward with, and I'm going to switch my entire collection into something like this. Now these kinds of pots are really helpful because it does provide additional air, but a clay pot without the holes also gets the job done, especially if the pot is smaller. If the pot is bigger, it's going to hold more moisture, so this is beneficial for a bigger pot. Smaller pot, you're totally fine with this. Now, why have I been thinking about this? Well, I have a Vanda, a larger type. Here's the ID. This was gifted to me. It's looking kind of sad. It may die. But I have this in coconut husk. Just coconut husk and some rocks. And I just haven't had the ability to water. This one makes me really sad because it looks like it's gonna die any moment now. But I'm gonna try to put this in moss and see if it can push through. But I've been thinking more and more about it because I'm like, all right, what good is a grow method if it's not keeping up with my ability to water? So when you're growing indoors, I think it's crucial to find the mix of media that will work for you with your conditions and your ability to water. And when you're growing indoors, you have to find something that will maintain moisture yet dry out quickly, which is what Vandas need. So most of my Vandas have been in this sort of situation. This one's not doing great. This one is thriving a bit more. But another thing that I did, and something you can also consider, is to mimic some of how some growers grow these in Florida. You could put this in a cup and do water culture like in a vase or a cup. This has a ton of algae in here, but it tends to work well too, where every couple of days I fill this up with water, let it soak for a few hours, and I dump the water, and then 3 times a week I do it again, and this one has been growing just fine. The ID for this is lost in here, but this is a Mimi Palmer hybrid. I got it as a tiny seedling, and I've had it in my care for 3 years. I think I'm gonna pot it up in moss in an airy pot, just so that I don't have to worry about this and keep everything consistent though. So I'm gonna go ahead and repot all of my Vandas. I'm gonna get them out of semi-hydro. This has been a waste for me. I mean, my orchids, some of them have died, some of them are surviving but not thriving. Like this one was in semi-hydro, but when I repotted it, all of the roots inside died. I think I'd probably see it with this as well. But I just wanted to show some of the more challenging orchids to grow indoors, and for me that would be Vanda orchids. Highly recommend you guys check out Neofinetia falcata orchids if you want to try something a little bit more easy in the Vanda family. These tend to do better. This one is in moss and it's growing really well. This one is a Neofinetia falcata yellow kind hybrid. This one came from Orchid Classics. They have a bunch of sales usually. But I'm going to be taking my entire collection. I'm going to move them into moss and just see how it goes. Here's one that was also struggling in semi-hydro. All of the roots were completely dead, so I had to put in this tiny, tiny pot. It's doing better, but it's still not doing great. So I'm going to move my entire collection into a setup like this. So I'm going to get to repotting these, and I'll show you what they look like at the end. And let me know down below if you grow Vandas indoors, how you care for them, especially the larger orchids, the larger Vanda orchids. I believe you can pot them up, but you have to find a way to let them dry. But they can't go too long without being dry, and they can't go too long with being wet. So you have to find a balance. If you water more heavily, you may want to use just bark. If you can water them every 2-3 days, maybe bark is the answer, especially if it's in a smaller pot. If you could water every day, bare root might be the answer, but you have to keep the humidity high because they like higher humidity, so maybe you have to spray it twice a day. If you have very humid conditions, you could grow them outdoors and hose them down every day, perfect. But when you grow indoors, you have to find a way to keep the humidity high, but let them dry, or else they die. So you really can't get more orchidy and finicky than that, can you? If you can figure out how to grow Vandas indoors, I think that you can grow any kind of orchid indoors, provided the temperatures align with the culture that you have in your environment. But yeah, Vandas like it hot, they like it humid, they want to be moist, but they want to dry. I keep saying it over and over, but that's what it is. And if you can't provide that, they will start looking like this. And I've been very bad this year with repotting, so that's my fault. But I'm gonna try to see if I could salvage this. I don't think so. I think it's pretty far gone here, but we'll see how it goes. But for sure, I'm in time to salvage this. We have new root tips. This one isn't stressed at all. I think it'll do better with moss in this clay pot. We're gonna salvage this one. And we're gonna just move everything over into sphagnum moss. I encourage you to pick whatever works for your environment, that works with your watering. I'll keep reiterating that, and I think you'll have success. So let me get to repotting these, and I will show you what they look like at the end. I'm gonna repot these Vandas. I decided against repotting the larger Vanda for now, since it looks like it's on the brink of death, but I have some in semi-hydro that I need to get out ASAP. These as well. The one in coconut husks that I showed you, I'm gonna put it in moss, and I'm gonna be repotting this that I have in water culture. This one is my Mimi Palmer hybrid. This was the one that was in water culture. The roots, unfortunately, were covered in algae and they were pretty much dead, so it had very little surface roots available. So I put it in the shallow pot in moss, and we're gonna see how it goes. This is not in the best shape. I wish I repotted it sooner. I've had this for over 3 years. I got it as a tiny little seedling, and it's been in that water culture, well, not quite water culture, but I give it wet dry cycles for 3 years, and it worked well. But the only thing is, when you see algae on the roots, you really have to rinse them off and scrub it off well before it adheres to the roots and suffocates the roots. So something to keep in mind. But now it's in moss. We'll see if it can pull through. This one here is the Vanda vietnamica. This was labeled as the Vanda greenlight. I got it from Gold Country Orchids. It was mislabeled, but this is the species orchid. I was surprised to see that despite this being in semi-hydro, this had quite a few viable roots. So it had a lot of roots that survived the grow method for 3 years, which is crazy, but it's growing quite nice. It lost a couple of leaves here and there, but it's bloomed many times. I think it'll do better in this setup. So it's just in pure moss. I added a few pebbles on the bottom for more drainage, but I kept it relatively fluffy, and this should dry pretty quickly, and I think it'll do well. This next one I also got with the Vanda vietnamica. This one is the Renantanda Sunrise Persong. I was also surprised it was in semi-hydro. I pulled it out of the pot. It came up pretty easily, but I was surprised to see that it had a viable root system in there. Not all of the roots were alive, of course, but it had like a nice cluster, so I was very happy with that. And I think it's going to do well in this setup. I did the same thing, put a couple of rocks in the bottom, and then put some moss here. It'll promote some quicker drying, and I think this will finally thrive for me in this setup. This little one was very sad. This was in semi-hydro, and let me get you the ID. This is the Neofinetia falcata Yellow Dragon crossed with Self. This was expensive, and I put it in semi-hydro, and everything that was under in semi-hydro died, and only the top part of the roots survived. So we'll see how it goes. That's why it's in such a tiny little pot, but we'll see if the top root system will let it survive. One of the fans died. You could see a remnant right there. This might fall off. Yep. So one of the fans died. We got 2 fans left. Let's see how it goes. I should have done better. I shouldn't have experimented with such expensive orchids, but I think it'll pull through in here. The next one, this was in the best shape. This one is a Neofinetia cross with the Ascocentrum miniatum. I got this from Orchid Classics, and most of those Vandas didn't do that great. This one did really well though, and it bloomed really nicely. This had a nice root system. It did well in coconut husk, and I just repotted it into moss, and I think it's gonna be happy in here. So Same setup as the others, with the exception of that one. I put some rocks at the bottom, put some fluffy moss. I'm gonna make sure that it is nice and drenched, and then I'm gonna let it dry and then water again, but I think I can get away with watering these twice a week. We'll see how it goes as I see how the moss works out in my environment with these, but I think twice a week will be good for these. And let me show you the last one, and this one kind of struggled. So this one is the Neofinetia Virgil. This one got a lot of spider mites, so it doesn't look the best. You can see that it's very miscolored here. I didn't catch the spider mites on time, and it took some of the leaves off. We'll see what happens with it. Root system was not the best, but we're gonna see how it goes here. I'm gonna try to give it every last fighting chance. Now, these are my Vandas that I repotted. I left a couple in their old setup, so some are already in moss. I left them there, so I'll deal with those later. I just wanted to do these emergency ones. And then I left my larger Vanda in the coconut husk. I was just thinking, I don't know if it's gonna make it. I may end up replacing it in a few days, but I'm just rethinking what I'm gonna do with it. It's just so far gone that I'm not sure what to do. But these are my repotted Vandas. If you guys want to see me repot them, check out the link up above where I repotted and transitioned one of my larger Vanda orchids into moss out of semi-hydro, so you could check that out if you want to see it. But I wanted to keep this video a little bit shorter. But I hope this was helpful. I hope this video was helpful. I find Vandas difficult indoors because of the reasons that I mentioned before, but I think you can totally grow them. You just have to experiment. So I'm sharing how I've experimented so that you can avoid messing them up like I have. I think once you find the balance of keeping your orchid moist versus allowing it to dry fast enough, you're gonna be in really good shape. So once you have that, I think you'll find the optimal mix for yourself. For me, it's gonna be sphagnum moss, and I'm gonna use clay pots to promote quicker drying, and that's because of my inability to water daily. But if you have time to water, by all means, grow them bare root. Keep the humidity up around the roots and around the plant if you can with humidifiers. But if you don't have time, you're gonna have to pot them up. If you have time to water more frequently, bark is probably great. You could just run it over your sink every couple days when it gets dry. If you don't have time to water like me, 2-3 times a week, moss will work out well. It's just a matter of experimenting and seeing what works for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye everyone.